Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating, highly specific botanical dilemma pulled straight from Ang's Notes on Gardening, specifically part 932. If you're someone who loves that intersection of detailed observation, personal aesthetics, and the practical realities of cultivating a collection, you are absolutely going to love this. We're looking at a plant called the Sunset Bell, scientifically known as Chrysothemis pulchella. But what makes this analysis so captivating isn't just the plant itself, right? It's the lens through which the author views it. It's essentially a perfect case study in how we evaluate the things we bring into our spaces, balancing that intense visual desire with cold, hard economics. Okay, let's dive into this mystery. Ang literally writes, "I was rather surprised to discover that I've never even once written anything about this plant species." I mean, think about that for a second. This is part 932 of a gardening series. We're dealing with a wildly prolific, deeply observant gardener who's documented hundreds upon hundreds of botanical encounters. Ang notes having seen the Sunset Bell numerous times during field trips to plant centers and nurseries over, quote, all these moons. Yet somehow, it completely slipped through the cracks. It's a brilliant reminder, isn't it? We can look at something countless times in our everyday routines, or even in our highly specialized hobbies, and still completely overlook it until a very specific moment forces us to finally see it. Now, what's really interesting about this discovery is the actual context. Ang didn't find this plant presented proudly at the front of a nursery during peak bloom. Nope. Instead, it was discovered out of season, literally just left tucked away in a dusty corner. There's something almost romantic about that, right? Stumbling upon a forgotten specimen when you aren't even looking for it? Because it wasn't the plant's typical season, it just wasn't meant to be the star of the show that day. But that quiet, entirely unexpected encounter in the corner of a plant center is exactly what prompted Ang to stop, observe, and finally document the Sunset Bell for the very first time. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer visual power of the Sunset Bell. When Ang finally stopped to really look at this out-of-season plant, they noted a completely striking visual anatomy. First, notice the foliage. It's not your standard run-of-the-mill green. It's a highly unique, textured mixture of bronze and black. That alone gives it this dramatic, moody base. Then, bursting right out of that dark foliage, you have these incredibly vibrant clusters of orange-red calyces. And finally, perfectly complementing that fiery red-orange, are the bright yellow trumpet-shaped flowers. It's a wonderful example of high-contrast botanical design. You got the dark, heavy leaves anchoring those neon-bright explosions of yellow and orange right at the top. Actually, I want to pause here for a quick, precise botanical definition, which Ang specifically made sure to include in the original post. A calyx refers to these sepals for the flower. So the sepals are those specialized leaves that form the outer protective layer of a flower bud. And in the case of the Sunset Bell, they don't just protect the flower, they're a massive part of the visual display. Ang points this out deliberately to clarify the plant's structure for us. Those vibrant orange-red clusters aren't the flower petals themselves, they're the calyces actually holding the bright yellow trumpet flowers. It's a great little detail that really shows Ang's commitment to not just admiring the plant, but properly understanding its exact anatomy. Let's move to and see how this builds on Ang's previous botanical explorations, because our gardener has a seriously sharp eye for patterns. While examining the Sunset Bell, Ang immediately makes a visual connection, noting that its striking color palette and structure are actually quite similar to a plant discussed just a few posts prior, the Mussaenda Red, which was covered in part 925. This comparison is fantastic. It gives us a direct window into the author's mental catalog. It perfectly shows how enthusiastic hobbyists and experts categorize their world. You know, they don't just see a plant in isolation, they see it in conversation with literally everything else they've ever studied. But here is where the story takes a fascinating turn. We've talked about the dramatic bronze and black foliage, we've highlighted the vibrant orange-red calyces, we've pictured the bright yellow trumpet flowers, and yet, Ang writes, "Judging from my aesthetic taste, the bloom does not satisfy my preference for flowering plants." Wow. Despite the objectively striking look, despite the totally unique structural beauty, the plant ultimately fails to meet the author's personal, highly subjective aesthetic standard. I absolutely love this because it perfectly captures the reality of any specialized pursuit. Just because something is unique or colorful or structurally fascinating doesn't mean it actually resonates with your personal taste. Ang recognizes the plant's uniqueness for sure, but remains entirely unapologetic about the fact that at the end of the day, the bloom just doesn't do it for them. So the crucial point is how this aesthetic judgment collides with practical economics. Finding a plant out of season doesn't just mean it's hidden in a dusty corner. It almost always means it carries a premium price tag. Ang notes that the price for this specific Sunset Bell was definitely higher than usual. And when you combine a higher than usual price with a bloom that does not satisfy, well, the decision-making process becomes incredibly pragmatic. Ang outlines an exact strategy here. Step 1, skip the current high-priced plant. It's just not worth the premium. Step 2, keep an eye out for a much more affordable seedling specimen to grow from scratch. Or Step 3, just exercise some patience. Wait until the next batch is imported to the local market when the abundance of in-season supply will inevitably drive that price right back down. It is a perfectly rational, step-by-step approach to collecting.
Which brings us to the core takeaway of today's explainer, and a question I really want to leave you to reflect on. Should unique aesthetics or seasonal price tags dictate our botanical collections? Or honestly, our collections of anything, really? Ang's field trip note perfectly captures that universal tension between what catches our eye and what actually makes sense for our wallets. Sometimes we find something incredibly rare and unique, but the timing and the price is just completely wrong. So, do you give in to the thrill of the unexpected find? Or do you step back, calculate the premium, and decide to wait for a better opportunity, knowing full well that your personal aesthetic preference might not even fully align with the item anyway? It's a wonderful little window into the disciplined mind of a true enthusiast. Thank you so much for walking through this structured botanical journey with me today. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.